Hello, hi. I think we're live now. I'm not totally sure. My name's Steve Ballinger. I'm a village agent for Burnham-on-Sea and Highbridge, and amongst other things, I quite often wear a hearing aid. I'm hard of hearing in one ear, and about a month or so ago, I did a course that was run by an organisation called Deafinate Matters, and it was about raising awareness about issues around hearing loss. The course was run by Deb Buller, and Deb has kindly agreed to join us today to tell us a little bit more about Deafinate Matters and hearing loss in general. So, Deb, tell us first of all, I mean, Deafinate Matters is Somerset based, isn't it, which is great. Tell us a little bit.
Good morning. So Deafinate Matters, it was set up in July 2020, and it stemmed from experiences that we had when lockdown started in March. And personally, I've got hearing loss as well, but there were many people that I knew with hearing loss, deaf people, who started to really struggle even more so with the COVID-19 pandemic, when people started wearing face masks. And those friends of mine and people I knew were discussing with me the issues that they were having. In particular, obviously, the communication barrier, because many people with hearing loss were using facial expressions to be able to understand partly what people were trying to convey and express, and lip reading as well. And obviously, masks, as a result, were stopping that from happening. So communication was becoming really, really difficult. And some of my friends started to experience mental health issues as a result. A lot of anxiety, stress, isolation even more so. And as a result, I just thought something needs to be done. So before I set up Deafinate Matters, I started raising money and just giving. And we raised money for the purpose of being able to raise awareness in local businesses, organisations, to be able to give them masks with clear panels. And I think I actually got one here. I can show you one of the ones I'm currently wearing. So you've probably seen them in the media. Very useful. So we managed to get a local person to make those. Thank you, Karen. And as a result, we were able to distribute those to raise awareness businesses of the difficulties that people with hearing loss and deaf people were experiencing, which was really good and raised a lot of awareness. It then became, as the lockdown carried on, it became very obvious that deaf people were having a lot of issues, as many people were, hearing people were with the pandemic. And they needed more support and didn't really know where to go. So I had a lot of conversations with Somerset County Council's sensory team, and we identified the sort of things that in Somerset possibly we could do with more help with. And I had a lot of conversations with various people that I knew and looked at researching into setting up a community interest company. Two other people became involved and were very interested as well. One who's deaf himself, so also has hearing loss, and the other sister was deaf, so she supported her sister. And the three of us got together and we set up Deafinate Matters in July. From there, it took off very, very quickly. We are completely funded by funding. Voluntary funding. So we immediately started applying for funding. To really, our three aims were to be able to provide training, things like deaf awareness, which yourself came on, also British Sign Language courses. But also another aim of ours was to really support people in the ways that they wanted to be supported. So deaf people, people with hearing loss, to be supported in the way they wanted to be supported, not in the way we thought they needed support. And as a result, we set up a social group that runs monthly. And that really was one where people use British Sign Language because, again, the isolation, not being able to have that contact. Every day they struggle with those problems. Obviously, not everybody uses British Sign Language, but in the pandemic, even more so. So we set up a social group. We also provide one-to-one support where needed. For example, at the moment, we're supporting a deaf person who is needing employment support. Again, use the British Sign Language, which I'm qualified in, so I'm able to do that. I'm also a qualified teacher, so I teach the British Sign Language courses, but I'm also qualified in advice and support as well. So it all sort of came together, really, and we're continuing our work today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth saying for anyone who needs to contact or would like to contact Deb, along the bottom of the page, you'll see the website address and an email address. Yeah, if anyone would like any more information at any stage, that's where to go for that information. You told us a little bit about how you started. One of the things that we discussed on the course was, and one of the things that I think would be valuable for lots of people, not just myself, but even businesses and people out there in the community, is how you recognise hearing loss. Mm-hmm. Something that you know, something quite basic that it's difficult to get your head around in some ways because it seems so basic. But there is a slide which hopefully Hannah will be able to. Hannah is lurking in the background somewhere, yeah. She's kindly put the slide up for us. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about some of those issues that are on there, Deb?
Yes, Steve. You know, we had quite a lot of discussion around this, didn't we, in the course, and we asked people to come up with what they thought would indicate hearing loss. And there are obviously some very, very obvious ones. I think many of us can identify with maybe family, especially elderly family members who have the television up loud. We all sort of had a bit of a laugh by that. I think we all identified that often happens. So people turning up the volume on the TV or radio maybe weren't doing so before and have done so now. One of the things, just before we go through the rest of the indicators of hearing loss, is, you know, why are we looking at this? You know, why are people not telling us they have a hearing loss? And well, some people don't. You know, historically, there was quite a stigma about hearing loss. Now, in this generation, hopefully that's broken down a bit, but it still exists. So people are quite embarrassed sometimes to talk about hearing loss, and so therefore don't tell people they have a hearing loss. And as a result, you know, people can't make those adjustments that are needed because they don't know about it. It is an invisible disability, unfortunately, and as a result, it doesn't often get identified, and people don't make those reasonable adjustments. So that's really important to say, that actually, as hearing people, if we can look out for the indicators of hearing loss, it can enable that person to feel much more supported and involved. So what are the ones that we've got here? Doesn't react to instructions or announcements. I've got a very good story there. Well, not so much about an announcement or an instruction, but I went with a friend of mine in the shop, and I had my back to the till. I was just looking at some of the clothes that were in the shop or something like that. And I was completely unaware that the lady behind the till was actually speaking to me. And she was completely unaware that obviously I couldn't hear her. So my friend was laughing afterwards. She was saying to me, this woman was thinking you were really ignorant and ignoring her. She said, I actually had to intervene and tell her that you couldn't hear. So it's things like that where, you know, we need to be aware of the indicators of hearing loss, and it's not always easy. But I don't know. When I'm looking at you, Steve, you can't see you're wearing a hearing aid. You couldn't see I was wearing a hearing aid. So sometimes if you can see the hearing aid or cochlear implant or other communication aids, then obviously that can indicate hearing loss. But some of them are very obvious. Somebody who's using sign language, for example. Failing to react to voices, noises behind them. Again, a very common one. I'll often have people come up behind me, and before I realise they're there, I may turn around and jump. You probably experienced that as well yourself, Steve, as well. Sometimes, especially if someone is a native British Sign Language user, what we mean by that is they were born deaf, their first language, British Sign Language. It may be, and I'm not generalising here, there are some people who may, their voice may be unclear, or, for example, like me, sometimes I don't hear the sound and loudness of my voice, or the complete opposite, may whisper because they don't hear the sound of their voice. Or conversation might be a little bit slower when they're speaking, or lacking intonation. And I haven't got with me today because I'm on my push bike, but you may see that they have a hearing dog as well, which again raises an awareness of hearing dogs, because my personal experience, I have a hearing dog, is when I take him in shops, especially locally in sometimes. Shopkeepers, businesses aren't aware that hearing dogs are assistance dogs. So I quite often get asked, well, I think more actually what it's about is they don't recognise the coat. So it's a burgundy coat, and I get quite often asked to leave the shop. One, I quite politely just explain that legally we are allowed to have assistance dogs in shops. They're fine. But a lot of people don't understand the hearing dog's coat. They don't recognise it. So there's lots of things there that can indicate hearing loss. There's many more as well, I'm sure. But those are quite common ones. You know, other things that we talked about, I think, Steve, was, you know, people who sort of cock their head to one side.
It's a bit of a clue, isn't it? Yeah.
They keep asking you to repeat. And we could laugh at some of these, but quite often, commonly, if we say, "Oh, can you not hear?" You might say, "Oh, how can I hear absolutely fine?" So there's quite a lot of denial around hearing loss, especially with older people as well. Yeah, it's very interesting. We had quite a big conversation about the indication.
We did, didn't we? And the next thing we were going to move on to, which there should be another slide for, is the kind of things that make it difficult to communicate. Slide.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a few things there that you wouldn't think of, aren't there?
About this one as well, didn't we? Yeah. And we sort of got you all to think about what are the different factors. So there's things about ourselves, you know, and the environment as well. And we looked at ourselves, and when we think about it, you know, especially for somebody who is trying to focus on you to lip read, or as another maybe British Sign Language user, sometimes our clothing can actually be a distraction away from the lips or from the hands if somebody's using British Sign Language. And the same with lots of jewellery. We talked about facial hair as well, didn't we, Steve?
We did, didn't we? Yeah, we did, didn't we? Yeah.
Especially the ability to lip read. Obviously, if people have beards that are quite overgrown, it does make it very difficult to lip read. So we talked about those factors as well. We also talked about the environment. So we talked about the necessity of having good lighting, and for the person who's talking, having the lighting on their face so that the person who may lip read can actually see what's being said more effectively. We also talked about, what else did we talk about?
Acoustics is an obvious one, isn't it? But,
we looked about background. Yeah, the environment background, again, for that distraction. So same as our clothes, And you can probably see behind me today, I've kept it very, very plain, very neutral, purely for the benefit of being able to not be distracted by anything around.
Yeah, okay.
And then we talked about vibrational movement distractions. So again, the same sort of principles there. And we talked about acoustics. So in the environment. So the room I'm in today is very, very hollow. I don't know whether you can hear it, but there's not a lot of furniture in the room to absorb sounds. So sometimes that's something we can consider when we're talking with people with hearing loss, is maybe there's another room that's much more beneficial.
Yeah.
And obviously, lastly, you can see there the seating and positioning. And we don't want to invade somebody's personal space when we're talking to them, but equally, we don't want to be too far apart either, so it becomes even more difficult to communicate. So there were just some examples that we came across with the barriers to communication as well.
Absolutely, and then moving on to do's and don'ts of communicating with a deaf person.
Yes, very interesting. Again, we all had quite a debate about this one. Quite often, if we say we can't hear, people start shouting. So really, please don't shout. Shouting distorts sound. People naturally raise their voice, but sometimes it can be too distorting, so the sound of it is not clear. Quite often it's about clarity of what we're saying rather than the actual loudness. The other one, which I think we've all probably experienced at some point, is when people start talking like this, which is undermining. It's just not very nice. So please try not to over-exaggerate lip movements. And again, if somebody is lip reading or somebody is trying to understand your body language, facial expressions, if we look away or turn away or look down, then that becomes really difficult. But just considering things like talking with the mouth, with a hand over the mouth like this, which makes it really difficult, I think, for anybody to understand what's being said. It makes it so much easier. Take your hand down, just make sure the face is visible. Another difficulty when people are speaking directly into a hearing aid. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, Judy.
No, they haven't. No.
Especially if you're lip reading. If somebody's talking into your ear, you can't lip read. And the last one, which I think is really, really important, is for as a hearing person, please don't give up and just walk away or say it doesn't matter. What that message conveys to somebody, to a person with a hearing loss, is that they don't matter. And I think that really is quite important, that people with hearing loss are quite often isolated anyway, and they feel excluded. So to just say it doesn't matter excludes them even further. So that's a really important point there. So what do we do? Obviously, we need to make sure that we have the attention of the person with the hearing loss, making sure we face that person, gain good eye contact with them. Again, we talked about lighting, making sure that our face is in a good light. Try to minimize the distractions around us. And try and speak clearly and naturally. And we naturally do use our body language and facial expressions, but we need to emphasize those just a little bit more to give extra clues of what we're trying to express. And I think we need a lot of patience. It is patience and repeating. And sometimes when repeating doesn't work, rephrasing what's being said if somebody's finding it difficult to understand. Speaking one at a time, some of these are very, very obvious, but it's some things that quite often we forget. We naturally forget. A very good point is making sure that that person knows what the context of the conversation is first and keep the conversation to the point. So I think we're all guilty of rambling on, just as I am now. But we've got those key points there so we can see them. And that is important, that when we do start a conversation, let's talk about what is the topic, what is the context of what we're talking about first.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of those things that you've just run through could be invaluable, say for shopkeepers, to know, you know, someone comes into their shop who's got hearing loss, to be able to identify that and then know how to effectively communicate with them is invaluable, isn't it? And it helps both parties, because there's a financial spin-off for them because they'll get the customers, but it also helps the person with hearing loss to not feel as isolated, doesn't it?
Exactly. And there are so many situations, like you said, you know, shop assistant, being in a shop, it could be in a doctor's surgery. There are so many environments where these sort of things can really help people with a hearing loss. And we talked about at the beginning about face masks and, you know, the difficulties there. And quite often people think that reasonable adjustment costs a lot of money, and that's what puts a lot of businesses off. But actually, some of them are very, very simple solutions. Writing things down, maybe just to ensure the deaf person or the person with hearing loss does understand. We can write things down as well. There are lots of different things that we can do. We discussed in the deaf awareness training about hospitals and audiology departments when deaf people go in and want their hearing aids repaired and so on. We talked about a number system there. So the deaf person or the person with a hearing loss takes a number, sits down in the waiting room. The nurse or the audiologist comes out, calls the number out. And we talked about difficulties I had with that. You know, I'm sat in a room waiting for that person to come out so I can read their lips to know what numbers. Anybody with a hearing loss can probably identify that names and numbers are really hard to grasp. So I'm sat there all the time waiting and waiting for that number. And we talked about how easy it is to find a solution to that. Some people said, oh, we could get a television screen with a number come up on it. But that costs money. The simplest solution that doesn't cost a penny, just put your finger up. Number one, number two. So simple. And it's things that we don't automatically think about, but they're easy solutions that can really be a positive way of breaking down barriers.
Absolutely. And the next slide, Hannah which Hannah will put on in a second, I think just shows one of the reasons why it's important. Hearing loss affects an awful lot of people in the UK, doesn't it?
Yeah, so there are approximately, and this is reference from Action on Hearing Loss, which has now changed its name back to what it was originally, the Royal National Institute for the Deaf. And they estimate about 12 million people with the hearing loss across the UK, which means 1 in 6 of us. And that is going down all the time. It's probably nearer to 1 in 5 of us at the moment. And that's quite a lot of people when you think about it. 50,000 children with hearing loss, again, approximately in the UK, and around half of those are born with hearing loss, while the other half lose their hearing during childhood. So we're talking quite a big impact on a lot of people here. There are approximately 900,000 people in the UK that have a severe or profound hearing loss. Mine is profound hearing loss. I'm not sure about yours, Steve. I can't remember what level we identified.
Mine's not so bad.
Okay. So that's important. That's another important point, really, that we don't generalize that everybody's hearing is the same, and yeah. the way they want that perceived to be the same as well. We talked about this in the deaf awareness training about how people want to define their hearing loss. It's a personal thing, and there is no right or wrong. It's about how that person wants to be their hearing loss to be perceived at, and remembering that the person is a person first and foremost, I think that is really, really important. And the hearing loss is just something other. It shouldn't really define the person.
Absolutely, and as the bottom line on that that latest image shows, by 2035, it's estimated over 14 million people in the UK. 14 million people in the UK will have hearing loss. So, yeah, as you say, it's a growing problem, isn't it?
Yes, yes, and this is why it's so important that local services, local businesses do make some reasonable adjustments for people with hearing loss. And quite often that can be just as simple as just asking them, what can we do for you? How can we make it easier for you? You as an individual person, how can we make it easier for you? Rather than assuming we need the latest technology in this and the latest technology in that. Sometimes just ask the person what works best. It's quite simple as that, really, isn't it?
Absolutely, and on the last slide that we've got, it shows how hearing loss can affect people, and again, a lot of big issues there, aren't there, that people can face, that people might not spring to people's mind.
Sometimes they don't link the two together, do they? You may see someone with poor concentration, but you may not necessarily link that with hearing loss. And obviously there are lots of other things that cause poor concentration, but it is something that we could consider. Actually, let's try and consider that hearing loss might be one of those reasons. So there's many there. There are lots and lots of people with hearing loss who struggle with identity and struggle with belonging. And I'm not, again, generalizing. There are also deaf people and people with hearing loss who have a strong sense of identity and belonging. So, but I'm just raising those, trying to help people understand the links of how it can impact on people with a hearing loss or with deaf. Education, again, we fail people, young children in education, and that is a well-known, documented research into that. I talk about that all day, but we probably won't have the time for that today. But there is sometimes people who with a hearing loss with a very poor education as well, through no fault of their own. We talked about stigma earlier, about how people can feel embarrassed, because there was always, historically, there's been a stigma about hearing loss. And there is much discrimination, and this is something that Deafinate Matters is trying to support people with a hearing loss and deaf people with. The loss of financial autonomy, as we can probably all be aware of, it is harder to keep a job. It is harder to find a job. It's not as easy to do some jobs as well as a hearing person without those reasonable adjustments. So therefore, it is about getting the right support in employment as well. There's a lot of intolerance as well with people with hearing loss. And lip reading and trying to communicate in different ways is very tiring, especially lip reading. If you're concentrating on somebody's lips 24 hours a day, that is exhausting. We talked about job servers, limited job opportunities, and we've talked earlier when we first started about mental health issues, which pre-COVID with hearing loss are very high levels of. There's a lot of frustration, a lot of anxiety that continuing over time can manifest in mental health issues.
Okay. Thank you. We've got a question coming on Facebook from Debbie Slater, just asking if there are any good online courses to learn basic sign language.
Yes, we are running quite a few online courses at the moment, especially obviously because of the lockdown. But we do try to tailor to people's needs anyway. So even if it's not in the lockdown period, we are trying to provide different ways of providing courses. So if you are interested, please do register that interest and let us know what you would like by emailing me on the address that you can see at the bar just below on this screen. That would be brilliant.
And one thing we haven't mentioned that we probably should is just to give a plug to where some of your funding comes from. Where some of your funding comes from. You're funded by Somerset Skills and Learning, aren't you? And is that right?
Yes.
And the
so
National Lottery?
We have gained funding from Somerset Skills and Learning, and also, thanks to the public, through National Lottery Community Fund as well. So we're very, very grateful for that funding. So we are able to provide free deaf awareness courses at present. And we are also where we're providing introduction to British Sign Language courses and also accredited courses. We are able to currently be able to give concessions at half price actually as well, which is a really good concession for people with hearing loss, or for those who are supporting immediate family with hearing loss, or on certain types of benefits as well. So it's well worth registering any interest you have, and spread the word as well. That would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Debbie. Is there anything you don't think we've covered today that that you'd like to share?
I think we've pretty much covered everything. And thank you ever so much for having me, Steve.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And I found the course really valuable. So we're really keen that we share.
Please do let everybody else know. Please let everybody know about it. It's a brilliant opportunity while we've got this funding, and we don't know how long it's going to last for. So please do take up the offer of these courses while they're there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're lucky to have you in Somerset as well, I think. So it's always good to see something start up in Somerset. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time and for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye, Steve.
Bye. And thank you to everyone who's joined us live, and we'll view this later on. Yeah, as you may know, our Facebook Live Talking Cafes are on every day of the week at 11 o'clock. So we're back again tomorrow, and the Sedgemoor team host theirs on a Thursday. Thank you. Take care, everyone, and stay safe. Bye.